The doctor begins the autopsy of a beautiful young woman, but what he discovers when he sees movement in her belly makes him call the police. The early morning was cold, one of those mornings when the silence feels as if it weighs heavily on your shoulders. The bus station in Aguascalientes, which is normally noisy and full of people in a hurry, was now almost empty. Only the distant sound of a truck engine could be heard as it pulled away, and the quick footsteps of a cleaning worker who suddenly stopped at the bench on the corner near the drinking fountain. He saw her. She was a young woman, lying curled up with her arms over her belly, as if she wanted to protect something. She was pregnant, very pregnant, but her face looked too pale. He approached her and called out, "Miss!" Nothing, not a movement. Her clothes were wet from the drizzle outside. She was shivering, or maybe she wasn't shivering anymore. It was hard to tell. They called the ambulance. 4 minutes later, the paramedics arrived. They gave her oxygen and checked her vital signs. One looked at the other and shook his head. Her pulse was very weak. Her breathing was barely noticeable. She had no identification, no bag, no clue as to who she was, just a brooch on her blouse with the name Emilia engraved in small letters. On the way to the hospital, inside the ambulance, silence filled the air. One of the paramedics, the most experienced one, looked at the monitor and whispered, "Nothing." The team tried to revive her, but she didn't respond. There were no screams, no loud sirens, just a tired sigh from someone who had seen this many times before. They filled out the report. Patient unresponsive, female, pregnant, approximately 25 years old. The driver turned off the emergency lights and, instead of going to the emergency room, they went straight to the morgue. They covered the body with a white sheet and placed her on the cold steel stretcher. The silence in the hallway was colder than the air conditioning. There was no one waiting for her, no one who knew her. No calls, no questions, nothing. It was as if the world had left Emilia alone even in her last moments. In the cold room of the morgue, Dr. Gabriel Valverde silently put on his gloves. It was just another early morning. He had seen everything in there: tragedies, abandonment, injustices. But that day, something felt different. He didn't know what it was. He just felt an uneasiness in his chest that he couldn't explain. The file was on the tray. Female patient, no identification, apparently pregnant, found dead. That was all. No exact age, no history, no name. He took a deep breath, lifted the white sheet carefully, and time stopped. Suddenly, everything slowed down. His eyes widened. His body froze. His hands, which for years had made that movement automatically, were now trembling. The young woman's face was like seeing a ghost. The same fair skin, the same shape of the chin, the delicate nose, the long eyelashes. It wasn't her. He knew it couldn't be, but she looked like her. It was Elena, his sister, who died 6 years ago in a car accident on her way back from a party, the one he couldn't save, the one who still dreamed sometimes asking him for help with that calm, frightened look. He took a step back, swallowed hard, felt a heat rising to his face, closed his eyes for a moment, trying to stop the wave of memories. He couldn't. Her voice came back to him as if it were yesterday. "You will always be my safe place, Gabby." That's what she called him, Gabby. No one else called him that. The images came like blows. Elena in the car, the phone ringing, the news, the hospital, her cold body, and his muffled crying in the empty hallway, asking why God had taken her now, of all people. That face, that young woman so similar, so calm, approached him again. He tried to push away the emotion, but it was impossible. He sat down on the steel bench next to the stretcher, took off his gloves angrily, and threw them on the floor. "Why do you have that look on your face?" he whispered. "Why did you have to show up here?" He leaned in closer. She looked closer. It was as if she were looking at Elena asleep. There was a sad peace in that face, which had surely been through many things. Gabriel ran his hands over his face, trying to calm himself, but his chest hurt. He, who had always been strong, now felt trapped by an old buried pain that returned like a stab. The loneliness of that young woman was the same he felt at his sister's funeral. The same absence, the same emptiness. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what had happened to her, but at that moment he felt he couldn't treat her like any other body. She seemed to be asking for help, even if it was silently, even if she didn't move. Gabriel took a deep breath, got up slowly, and stood there staring as if he were facing something that was not only physical, as if that face had come to remind him of a promise he had forgotten to keep, never to leave anyone alone again. Gabriel was standing next to the stretcher, trying to organize his thoughts, his heart still heavy with the memory of his sister. There was something strange about that early morning, and he felt it throughout his body. But as a doctor, he knew he had to follow protocol. He took a deep breath, grabbed the surgical scalpel, and prepared the instruments with the coldness that the job demands. Or at least he tried to, but then something changed. It was so slight that at first he thought he had imagined it. A small tremor, almost as if a small wave had passed under the sheet at the level of the young woman's belly. He frowned, looked down, and waited. It must have been my imagination, he muttered to himself. He put his gloves back on and took 2 steps to the side, but there it was again, a small movement. Yes, but real. It wasn't a spasm. It wasn't air. It wasn't an involuntary contraction. It was a kick, as if someone inside that belly was trying to say, "Hey, I'm here." Gabriel stood still. The scalpel paused in midair. He leaned slowly, lifted the sheet only to the height of her belly, and stared. The room was completely silent, a silence that hurt his ears. And then again, the movement. This time he saw it clearly. A little push from the inside out, weak but full of life. "My God," he whispered, his voice trembling. "There's a live baby in here." His heart began to beat fast. His doctor's mind kicked into action, pushing the shock aside. He ran to the intercom and pressed the button hard. "Obstetric emergency. Autopsy room. I repeat, autopsy room." Someone on the other end answered, but he couldn't hear them clearly. The sound of his own blood pounding in his ears drowned out everything else. He returned to the stretcher, knelt beside the young woman's belly, and placed his hand carefully on it. He felt the warmth of her skin, her round belly, and another movement. "You're fighting, aren't you?" he said, looking at her belly. "You didn't give up." When the team rushed in, the scene seemed crazy. Doctors and nurses looked in amazement at a woman considered dead, but with a living baby moving inside her. "We need a portable ultrasound quickly. Bring me a fetal Doppler," Gabriel shouted. His eyes were already filled with tears, but not from fear. It was something else, a mixture of hope, desperation, and faith, a faith he thought he had lost long ago. While he waited, he caressed the young woman's face and whispered, "I don't know who you are, but I swear to God, I won't let your child die in here." Her belly trembled a little, as if responding, as if saying, "Thank you, Gabriel." He didn't think twice. He didn't want to wait for the equipment to be brought in. He left the instruments right there, opened the door forcefully, and ran out into the hospital corridors. His footsteps echoed, mixed with his heavy breathing, his gown flying behind him, the patient's file clutched in his hand. Everything was happening very fast, but inside him, it was as if time had stopped. In the nursing area, he shouted, "Obstetrics, there's already a live baby. I repeat, live." The nurses looked at each other, unable to believe what they had just heard. The mother was given up for dead, but the baby is moving, he repeated, his eyes wide open. No more needed to be said. Within seconds, a team was running alongside him. Obstetricians, nurses, a resident trembling with nerves. It was like a scene from a movie, but real, totally real and desperate. Back in the room, the young woman still did not move. The sheet still covered part of her face, and only her belly was uncovered. But now, there were Doppler monitors, ultrasound machines, screams, hurried footsteps, sweat on foreheads. The voices were fast, nervous. The baby's heart rate was detected. It was weak, but the mother was not responding to stimuli. Her blood pressure was almost 0. "Bring the stretcher. We're going to transfer her." Gabriel stayed there next to her, holding her hand. He could feel her skin, cold, really cold, and that hurt. "Hang in there, please," he whispered, trying not to cry. "Please, just a little longer." On the other side of the room, a doctor with more than 30 years of experience in obstetrics tried to maintain control of the team. "We're going to act as if we're saving 2 lives until proven otherwise. This mother is alive. It was a race against fate, against time, against the statistics, against logic, against death. Gabriel didn't let go of her hand. He felt the weight of responsibility and an old pain mixed with hope. The image of his sister came back to his mind like a ghost, like a push from heaven. It was as if Elena were there telling him, "Don't give up." Inside the emergency room, the team was already preparing as they followed every second on the monitors. They quickly put on gloves and masks. Monitors turned on, the beep marking the seconds as if they were blows. The sound that filled everything was that of the baby's heart, weak and steady, but present, fighting. "Fetal rate 88 beats per minute. It's dropping," one of the doctors shouted. Gabriel closed his eyes for a second and took a deep breath, then turned to everyone. "They said this woman was dead, but here she is. And this baby is here too. We're not going to let this end like this. We're going to do everything." The whole team nodded. They already understood. No one argued. They put in probes, started IV medication, adjusted the oxygen. Their hands worked carefully, but their faces told a different story. The tension was palpable. The atmosphere was heavy. There was sweat in their eyes, trembling hands, closed mouths. No one spoke, except when necessary. Gabriel stood still for a moment, looking at the monitor. The baby's heartbeat rose and fell, then fell again, and then came back, weakly, but it came back. "She's fighting," he whispered. "She's fighting." But the woman didn't react. Her eyes remained closed, her body motionless, without strength, her face calm but distant, as if she were between two worlds, as if she were deciding whether to stay or go. Gabriel took her hand again, that cold, fragile hand that he wanted to warm with all the humanity he still felt inside. "Please listen to my voice. Just listen. Your baby needs you. I'm here. You're not alone. Can you hear me? You're not alone." One of the doctors looked at him, as if he wanted to say something, but he didn't. It was as if everyone there knew that this struggle went beyond medicine. It was a race against fate, against time, against death, which had already knocked on the door and seemed ready to enter. The young woman remained was not moving, but the baby's heart was still beating. And as long as it was beating, no one there was going to give up. The tests came back quickly. Ultrasound, blood pressure, oxygen saturation. One of the doctors looked at the screen, then turned to Gabriel, hesitating. "It's a miracle. She's alive, but only just." The other added, "Minimal brain activity. Pulse is barely detectable. Breathing is very weak." Gabriel, his eyes on the Doppler screen, asked with a trembling voice, "How's the baby?" A technician replied, unable to hide his nervousness. "The baby's heart rate is unstable, but it's still there. It's still there." No one moved for a few seconds. It seemed impossible, inexplicable. A woman who was said to be dead, with weak vital signs, and a baby that wouldn't give up. Then Gabriel stepped forward and looked at the team. His voice trembled, but it was firm. It came from deep within his chest, like a plea or an order. "We're not giving up." He looked again at the young woman lying on the stretcher, her face pale, her body fragile but still there. Two hearts were beating here, both listening to him. The room fell silent. One of the nurses nodded with tears in his eyes. The senior doctor, with many years of experience, nodded her head in agreement. "Then let's fight," she said. They gave the mother medications and oxygen, while monitoring her continuously. Gabriel didn't leave her side for a second. His hands rested on the stretcher, his eyes fixed on this woman with no name, no history, but with a whole life inside her. "You're not going to leave now," he said, almost in a whisper. "There's someone here who needs you." He ran his hand over her forehead, as if caring for a daughter, a sister, someone he didn't know but already felt in his heart. "Stay with us, please. Just a little longer." After hours of tension, attempts, tests, and hope, the diagnosis arrived. "She is in a deep coma," the neurologist said clearly, with no significant neurological responses. The young woman's brain was still functioning, but minimally, with no date for her to wake up. It was as if she were in a distant place, trapped between here and the afterlife. Gabriel listened to everything in silence. He stood still in a corner of the room with his arms crossed and his face turned toward the window. The doctor said what she had to say carefully but firmly. He just nodded his head and said nothing. After everyone left, he stayed alone with her. The room was in darkness. The sound of the monitor marking her heartbeat filled the silence with a fragile rhythm. And there, lying connected to the machines, was Emilia. That was the name on the gold brooch she carried in her pocket, now stored in a small drawer next to the bed. Emilia Navarro. That was all they knew. Someone with that name was engraved on the brooch she had in her pocket. No family members showed up, no friends called, no messages. It was as if she had come out of nowhere, fallen from the sky, or escaped from somewhere where no one missed her. She had no documents, no cell phone, no photos, no memories, just her and the baby. Gabriel approached the bed, pulled up a chair and sat down. He stayed for a while, looking at her face. She was calm, pale, her eyes closed, her lips parted as if they still wanted to say something. Her belly moved slowly with her breathing. There was still life inside her. There was still a future. He spoke softly. "I don't know who you are, where you come from, what you've been through, but I swear by everything that is sacred that you will not be alone." He paused, looked at the baby's heartbeat monitor, and said, "Your baby is here. He is alive, strong, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to make sure he's born healthy and that you're here when that happens." The next day, the medical team met. The tests showed that the baby was still developing, still fragile, still at risk, but with possibilities. That's when Gabriel decided they would do everything. Everything. They would maintain intensive care, tube feeding, physical therapy, neurological stimulation, 24-hour monitoring. They made a plan to try to keep the patient, now named Emilia, alive long enough for the baby to grow safely. It was a daily struggle with no promises, but with faith. The days began to pass. The name Emilia Navarro was written on the whiteboard in the ICU as a priority. The doctors took turns. The nurses talked to her even though she didn't respond. Some prayed. Others sang softly when they were alone during the early morning shift. Gabriel became a fixture in that room every day without fail. It didn't matter if it rained, if it was a holiday, or if his shift had been heavy. He always arrived at the same time, wearing a slightly wrinkled gown, unshaven, and with tired eyes, but with a firm, whole presence that filled the room. He sat in the same chair on the left side of the bed and held Emilia's hand carefully. Sometimes he remained silent, listening to the sound of the machines as if waiting for a response. But most of the time he talked and talked as if she were awake. He told stories about the hospital, old cases, things from his childhood, memories of his sister Elena, which he recounted with such affection in his voice that it seemed as if she still lived there among those walls. "You know, Elena made me laugh even when I wanted to disappear from the world. Sometimes I think that if she were here, she would wake you up just by telling you a bad joke." He also read the Bible she left on the nightstand and read aloud, slowly, fragments of hope, of miracles, of new beginnings. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil," he read, and then paused. "That's right, Emilia. If you can't fight now, I'll fight for you." And he gently squeezed her hand, even though she didn't squeeze back, even though she didn't move. The nurses began to notice when he entered. Her heartbeat rose a little. The graph moved with more rhythm, slightly, but it moved as if something inside still heard, still felt. Meanwhile, the pregnancy continued. The ultrasounds showed the baby to be very small for its age, but with a strong heartbeat, resisting, swimming in that silent sea, protected by a mother who seemed absent but was still there in her own way. One day, Gabriel entered the hospital meeting room and saw two social workers sitting with a pile of papers on the table. "Doctor, we need to talk about the baby's future." He sat down, a little impatient, and listened to the mother's condition, and because she had no identification, no family, and was now in a coma, the protocol said that when the baby was born, it had to go to a shelter. She didn't respond immediately. She just stared into space, then slowly got up and said in a firm, almost trembling voice, "She has a mother. She's here, alive, fighting. She just can't talk yet. But she's alive, and that baby isn't invisible. It's someone. It's a life. It's a daughter." The women tried to respond, but Gabriel was direct. While I was breathing, no one is going to take that baby away from her mother. They have each other, and now they have me too. He left the room without waiting for a response. He went straight to the room, sat in the same chair as always, took Amelia's hand again, and said, "They want to take your daughter away from you, but I won't allow it. I promise you." And for a second, just for a second, he had the impression that her fingers squeezed back almost imperceptibly, almost like a dream. The evening light entered faintly through the crack in the curtain. Outside, the rain fell softly, tapping gently on the windows. The sound was almost like a hypnotic song, the kind of rain that makes the city slower, sadder, quieter inside. It was on an afternoon like that Gabriel entered the room as he did every day, but on that particular day, he didn't bring any books, nor a gown, no medical reports. He brought only himself and a tired heart. He sat in his usual chair on the left side of the bed. Her cold, fragile hand was waiting for him, as if she already knew. He took it carefully, ran his fingers over her thin knuckles, and sat there quietly for a while. Then he spoke softly, as if talking to someone he loved, even though he would receive no answer. Today, it rained. He gave a sad smile and looked out the window. "I went out during my break just to get some air, but I didn't even feel the wind. I just kept thinking about you." He paused, his eyes beginning to fill with tears, but he continued speaking. "Your daughter kicked again. The nurse called me and said she was moving. I went and put my hand on her. Yes, I felt it. It's strange, you know. It's like she knows when I'm there. It's like she's waiting for me." He swallowed hard. "And I'm here. Amelia, I'm waiting for you." His voice broke a little. He took a deep breath and tried to hide what he was feeling, but it was useless. "Don't leave me alone, please. I know you're in there. I know it. And if you're listening to me, pay attention. It's okay if you're tired. It's okay to be afraid, but come back. At least try for her, for me." He ran his hand through his hair nervously, then lowered his head and rested his forehead on his hand. "I already lost once. I lost my sister, and I never forgave myself for not being there when she left. But now I'm here. I'm with you, and I'm not going anywhere. Even if no one understands, even if they say I'm crazy, I'm not going to let go of your hand." Silence filled the room again, but it was a different kind of silence, warm and full of everything that cannot be put into words. Outside, the rain continued to fall, but inside that little room, two lives were connected. One was fighting to exist, and the other was slowly beginning to feel what it was like to live again. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and Amelia remained the same, body still, eyes closed, unresponsive, like a flower that has not yet decided whether to bloom or wither away forever. But inside, the baby was growing slowly, carefully, as if it could sense the world outside, and was thinking twice before arriving. Every test was tense, a waiting period filled with fear. Sometimes the heartbeat was strong, other times very weak. The doctors looked at each other in silence, avoiding saying anything. Everything was unstable. Everything could change from one day to the next. Gabriel knew this better than anyone, and yet he was still there every day, Monday to Monday, without fail. He arrived with the same calm step, even on days when his body wanted to stay in bed, give up, disappear. He entered the room and smiled, not always with his face, but with his presence. "Good morning, Amelia. You look even prettier today," he would say, pulling up a chair and sitting down next to her. He would take her hand, as he always did, and start talking. Sometimes he would tell jokes. Other times he would just talk about his day, about bad coffee, about a difficult patient, about a little bird he saw at the window. "Today, I saw a pregnant woman in line at the hospital. She was laughing with her hand on her belly. I remembered you. I imagined I wonder what your smile would be like now, if you could feel this little girl kicking. She's very stubborn, just like you, I think." Over time, his colleagues began to observe him from a distance. Some respected him, others criticized him. "Gabriel, you're getting too attached. That's not healthy," they told him. He listened, but didn't respond, because deep down he knew they were right. But there was no turning back now. He was already connected to those two lives in a way that no one could understand. It was as if God had put Amelia in his path, not by chance, but as an answer. Gabriel no longer saw just a patient. He saw someone who needed him, someone who, even though she couldn't speak, asked him to be there, asked for faith. He took care of every detail. He brought flowers to decorate the room. He played soft music on his cell phone. Sometimes he held the phone close to her belly and let the baby listen to Bach or sounds of nature. Are you listening, kid? Here's Uncle Gabriel, or maybe just Gabriel. It doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm here. There were nights when he fell asleep right there, sitting in the chair with his head next to the bed. Nights when he woke up scared by the sound of the monitors, thinking it was the end, but it wasn't. Not yet. He looked at the tests as if trying to understand a secret code. Every millimeter increase in the baby's weight was a victory. Every movement in the womb, a hope. And even though Amelia gave no sign, he didn't give up. Are you listening to me, girl? I'm not going anywhere, eh? Don't even try to ignore me. I'm stubborn, I insist. I think it was a fight against time, against the statistics, against fatigue, frustration, loneliness. But Gabriel had already made a decision, and he repeated it every day, even though he didn't know if she could hear him. You're not alone anymore. It was early morning, one of those times when fatigue feels greater than the body, and the soul weighs, as if it were carrying the world on its back. The hospital was silent. The lights in the hallways were dim. The footsteps of the few workers on duty were muffled. Gabriel walked slowly with his shoulders slumped, the file folder slipping in his hand. He no longer looked like a doctor. He just looked like a tired man. He entered the room as he always did, but this time without that air of hope, without jokes, without books, without forced smiles. Just him, broken inside. He stood next to the bed and looked at Amelia. She was still the same. The machines turned on, the beep marking life, but a life that did not wake up. Her belly was bigger now. The baby was growing, but she remained silent. Gabriel pulled up a chair with a heavy sigh, sat down, ran his hands over his face, and for the first time in months, he cried. He cried like someone who had been holding it in for a long time, silently, his jaw trembling and his eyes full. I'm tired, Gabriel said with a broken voice. I'm trying to be strong, but today was too difficult. He looked at her, as if he were still waiting for an answer. Nothing, only the sound of the monitors and the rain outside, beating against the glass without stopping. I know I've already told you a little bit of the story, but I lost my sister without being able to say goodbye. An accident. They called me out of the blue, and I didn't get there in time. I arrived. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't hold her hand. I didn't promise anything. I was just left with emptiness. She swallowed hard and took a deep breath, but her voice was still trembling. And now you're here, nameless, with no one but me trying to keep you alive, holding you by force. He moved closer and carefully placed his hand on her chest. I don't want to lose you too. Please, if you're listening to me, give me a sign, anything. Step into this world again, for you, for your baby. He squeezed her hand tightly, as if that gesture could pull her back to life. His eyes filled with tears. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. They told me to stop, to accept it. But how can I accept it? How can I let go? How can I turn my back when there's a heart beating inside you? When there's a little girl waiting for you to wake up? He rested his forehead on her hand. Exhausted, he stayed like that for minutes in silence. Just crying. Just him and her and God. If there's still a chance, even if it's small, please show me. In that cold room, in that empty dawn, Gabriel experienced his most human moment. The moment of almost giving up. The next day, the sun hadn't even risen when Gabriel entered the room. The night before had been too heavy, perhaps the most difficult of all. His face still felt swollen from crying so much, his eyes burning, his body tired as if he had run inside his soul. But still he came. He came because he no longer knew how to live without being there. He opened the door slowly. The room was still in darkness, with only the light from the window. The sound of the monitor remained the same, constant, low, patient. He entered, pulled up the chair with the same care as always, sat down next to her, and held Amelia's hand once more. He stayed there quietly, breathing deeply, trying to gather strength for another day. Good morning, Amelia, he murmured. Here I am again. He smiled slightly, but it was a sad smile, the smile of someone who loves but no longer knows what to expect. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, squeezing her hand affectionately, and then he felt it. At first, he thought it was a mistake, a reflex perhaps, but he looked closely. The tip of her finger moved slightly, slowly, almost not noticeable, but real. "Wait," he whispered, his eyes wide open. He looked again, and there, right in front of him, the same finger moved again, this time more firmly. Gabriel whispered softly, almost afraid to believe it. He leaned over her, his eyes filled with tears, his heart beating fast as if he had been startled. He looked at every part of her face, every detail, and then he saw it. From the corner of her left eye, a slow, solitary tear fell, a single drop that rolled down her cheek and stayed there, shining in the soft light of the room. Gabriel couldn't hold back his tears. He jumped up from his chair, grabbed her hand tightly, and pressed it against his chest. "Are you listening to me, Amelia? Are you there?" His voice trembled, the words coming out broken between sobs and laughter. "My God, you're here. You're coming back. I knew it. I knew you were coming back." He fell to his knees beside the bed, holding her hand with both of his, now staring at her as if he wanted to keep that moment forever. Thank you, Lord, thank you." And in that room, where for so many days there had only been silence and waiting, the first miracle was born. Small, subtle, almost shy, but for Gabriel it was like seeing life being born again. He approached calmly, trying not to get too emotional. He sat down in the chair and took her hand as he did every day, and he stared at her face in silence, waiting, and then she blinked once, twice, slowly, then opened her eyes, at first with difficulty, like someone trying to wake up from a very long dream. Her eyes were moist, confused, but alive. Gabriel jumped up. Amelia turned her face slightly toward him, her lips trembling, her voice coming out as a hoarse, weak whisper, but clear. "I heard you every day." Time passed, and Gabriel covered his mouth with his hand, his eyes instantly filling with tears. A sob escaped him, and he collapsed. "My God, you came back. You came back." She took a deep breath with effort. She still looked very weak, but in that small gesture was everything. Life, consciousness, a miracle. "Your words gave me strength," she said, trying to smile, even though her face showed pure exhaustion. He held her face with both hands, with the care of someone holding something too precious. He kissed her forehead with tears falling. "You heard me the whole time." She nodded slightly, and another tear fell, this time from her other eye. Now they were both crying, but it was a different kind of crying, a cry of relief, of reunion, of life. Gabriel pressed the buzzer urgently. Nurses and doctors came running in. They began the examinations, checking her vital signs and reflexes. A little to the side, but he never let go of her hand. Later, with the room quieter and them alone, she looked at him with eyes still heavy and said very softly, "I want to keep the baby. I don't want them to take her away." Her voice was almost a plea, almost a fear. Gabriel squeezed her hand firmly and smiled with great, contained emotion. "She's waiting for you, and now more than ever, she knows her mother has returned." A few days had passed since Amelia opened her eyes. She was still very weak, spoke little, and tired easily, but her mind was there, fully present, and with it came something that weighed more than her body, an old hidden pain that no one could see, the kind of pain that doesn't bleed on the outside, but burns on the inside. Gabriel noticed that she was hiding something very heavy in her eyes. There was too much silence in her gestures, too much caution, like someone who is afraid even to exist. He didn't pressure her. He was just there, always there, sitting by the bed, listening, watching, waiting. It was a cloudy afternoon. The room was silent. She had been staring at the ceiling for minutes without saying anything, until she slowly turned her face, took a deep breath, and spoke in a low, trembling voice. "I didn't want to tell you this, but you deserve to know." Gabriel moved a little closer without saying anything, just listening. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then, with a mixture of courage and pain, she began. "I ran away from home." She paused, her voice trembling. "My cousin abused me for years, ever since I was a child." Gabriel closed his eyes slowly, feeling a lump in his throat, but he didn't interrupt her. I tried to tell my mom, my aunt, but no one believed me. They said I was making it up, that I was a troublemaker, that I just wanted attention. A tear fell from the corner of her eye. I cried inside every day. When I got pregnant, they accused me of being a worthless prostitute. They called me useless. They humiliated me every second, and never believed me when I talked about the abuse. My aunt accused me, insulted me, made everyone call me a liar and stay away from me. There came a point when I couldn't take it anymore, so I grabbed a small backpack and a sweater and left without a destination. I got on the first bus that stopped at the terminal. I didn't ask where it was going. I just wanted to disappear. Gabriel listened to everything in silence, his hands clenched between his knees, his jaw tense. It was hard to hear, even harder to imagine. When I got off, it was here, this city, this hospital, you. She turned her face toward him, her eyes red and tired, but there was something new there, a little courage. I thought I had lost all my dignity, my body, my history, but when I heard your voice there in the darkness, it was as if God had found me. Gabriel slowly got up. He went to the edge of the bed and held her face with both hands. His eyes were also filled with tears. You didn't lose anything. Whoever did that to you tried to extinguish your light, but they couldn't. You're here, alive with your daughter, and now with the truth, and far away from all those people who don't deserve you. You have the opportunity to raise your baby far away from everything that hurt you. She cried, as if cleansing her soul, as if for the first time in a long time she felt seen. And Gabriel stayed there as always, only now closer than ever. The room was quiet. It was late afternoon, and golden sunlight streamed through the window, painting the walls with a warm, almost magical tone. Emilia was sitting on the bed, leaning on some pillows, her hair tied back, her skin still pale but alive. She had just gotten emotional telling everything, and now the silence between her and Gabriel said more than any words. He was standing in front of her with his arms crossed and his gaze fixed, but it was not the gaze of a doctor. It was another kind of gaze, one that sought meaning where before there had only been pain. He stood there for a few seconds without saying anything, as if he were gathering together everything that had happened on all the improbable path that the two of them had traveled up to that point. Emilia looked down in shame. She still felt that she was carrying a weight, a guilt, a past that stained her, but Gabriel didn't look away for a second. And then he said, "You could have gotten off anywhere." She looked up slowly. So many cities, so many destinations, and right here, he paused. Right at the hospital where I was on call that night, right in the room where I was going to perform an autopsy and found life, right in the hallway where no one else believed, and I decided to stay. He smiled a little, but his eyes were full of tears. "You know what I think?" She shook her head slowly. "God brought you here." She frowned as if she still didn't believe that, but he went to her and knelt down beside the bed, and she took his hand affectionately. "I'm not talking about coincidences. I'm talking about something bigger. You didn't get here by chance. You were guided, protected, even though silently, even though suffering. And when you arrived, I didn't even know, but it was me who needed you." She let out a soft cry. She lowered her eyes, and the tears fell like relief, like a hug. "Do you think there's still hope for me?" she asked in a low voice. Gabriel leaned his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his breathing shaky. "If only you knew how much you've already changed my life just by existing." The two of them stayed there in silence together, breath by breath, life by life. And at that moment, it was unclear whether it was fate or a miracle. Perhaps the two of them spent a few weeks there. Emilia was still recovering, weak but increasingly conscious. The baby was growing well with the attention of all the doctors, as if the entire hospital were caring for her. But what no one could avoid was the fear, the doubt of what the birth would be like. And on that gray morning, when the sky seemed unable to decide between rain and sun, she began to feel the contractions. They were strong, fast, painful. Emilia was trembling. She was scared. She was sweating cold. Gabriel was there by her side the whole time, holding her hand, saying, "Breathe. I'm here. Everything will be fine." But the situation was complicated. Her blood pressure was rising and falling. The baby's heartbeat was unstable. Nurses came and went, running. The doctors looked at each other with that tension that is only known inside a hospital. Everything could change at any second. "You're going to need strength, Emilia. All the strength you have," said the doctor gently but firmly. Emilia closed her eyes, bit her lips, cried from pain, cried from fear, and suddenly said, "I can't." Gabriel moved closer, rested his forehead on hers, and said softly, "Yes, you can. Look at everything you've already been through. This is just the beginning of a new life. For her, for your daughter. Go with her." She pushed once, twice, 3 times. The monitor beeped loudly. The baby's heart rate dropped for a few seconds that seemed like hours. The room froze, and then the sound. A cry, a loud, deep, pure cry. The most beautiful sound in the world. Milagros was born, tiny and fragile, but alive, full of life, with her eyes closed, her mouth wide open, and her lungs working. Gabriel was the first to hold her in his arms. He couldn't hold back. He cried right there in the middle of the room with the baby in his arms. Tears fell uncontrollably. It was a cry of everything: relief, faith, miracle. He looked at Emilia, who was still lying exhausted but with a tired smile on her face, and she said in a hoarse voice, "She's going to be called Milagros, because it's a miracle that we are both here." He smiled with his eyes closed and carried the baby to her, placing her in her mother's arms. The two looked at each other for the first time, as if they had been reborn, and in that moment, everything made sense. All the pain, all the waiting, all the difficult days had been worth it, because a new story had begun. The smell was still that of a newborn, that soft, sweet smell that only someone who has held the little miracle slept in Emilia's arms, wrapped in a white blanket. The mother's eyes, still swollen from emotion and exhaustion, never left her daughter for a second. It was as if she was afraid to blink and have it all disappear. Gabriel sat next to her, his eyes shining, watching the two of them in silence, as if he were witnessing a miracle unfold before his very eyes. Emilia could hardly speak, but she whispered, "She's perfect." He smiled and gently touched the baby's little hand, which moved slowly, as if to say, "Here I am." But the peace was short-lived. A few hours later, as dawn was breaking, there was a knock at the door. 3 people entered the room, a man and 2 women, all wearing social services badges. Their tone was serious, formal, and cold. Gabriel got up slowly, sensing that something was not right. The older woman, taller woman with a serious face, was direct. "We received the case report. Since the mother has no fixed address, no job, her family history is unknown, and she spent months in a coma, the girl will be taken to a shelter until her legal situation is reviewed." Emilia's heart stopped. She held Milagros tightly against her chest. Her eyes filled with tears instantly. She had trouble breathing. She was desperate. "No, please don't take her away," she begged, her voice breaking. "She's all I have. She's my daughter." The social workers looked at each other. One stepped forward. "Ma'am, we understand, but it's protocol. The baby needs a safe, stable environment." It was then that Gabriel stepped forward firmly, his voice low but strong. "If you try to take this girl away, you'll have to go through me." The room fell silent. What they said may make sense on paper, but not here. Not after everything what this woman went through, not after everything this girl fought to be born. The mother is alive, conscious, clear-headed, and clinging to her daughter with all her strength. There is no shelter in the world that can give her more love than she is giving her now. The girl needs her. Tears ran down Emilia's face. She could only nod her head as if to say yes, unable to speak. Gabriel continued, "I am a doctor, but more than that, I am a man, and I am saying with all the responsibility in the world, they have me, they have care, they have protection, and they have a story that no one will erase." The youngest of the agents hesitated. The oldest put on a serious face, but did not respond. They remained silent for a few seconds, and then left, saying they would return with a new evaluation. When the door closed, Emilia broke into soft, almost silent tears. Gabriel went to her, knelt beside the bed, and took her hand. "I promised you that you would never be alone, and I keep my promises." Milagros slept peacefully, as if she knew that even though she didn't understand the danger, she was safe. The day of her discharge arrived. The doctor entered the room with a discreet smile, the kind that shows how hard it was to win that battle. Emilia carried Milagros in her arms, wrapped in a light pink blanket they had been given at the hospital. She was still weak and walked slowly, but her gaze had a different light, a mixture of fear and gratitude, like someone who had just come out of a storm with their eyes closed. Gabriel appeared shortly after, with a coat folded under his arm and the discharge papers in his hand, ready to see her new home. "Are you ready to go?" he asked, trying to sound relaxed but with a gleam in his eyes that said it all. Emilia looked at him hesitantly, as if she still didn't quite understand what was happening. "But where are we going?" Gabriel smiled slightly and replied calmly, "To my house for now, until you feel safe, until we see what to do." She froze for a second, her heart beating fast. "No, it's not necessary. I don't want to bother you." Emilia interrupted him tenderly. "You saved me without knowing it. All I'm doing now is giving you back what you gave me, in my own way." The journey was silent. She looked out of the car window as the city passed slowly by. Milagros slept in her lap, and her chest was filled with a feeling she had never felt before, belonging somewhere, even if only for a short time, even if she was still afraid. When they arrived, Gabriel opened the door carefully and went in first, as if he wanted to set the mood. The house was simple but warm, with light colors, few things, and silence. A beautiful silence, different from that of the hospital. He guided her to the end of the hallway and stopped, standing in front of a door. He took a deep breath and looked at her. "This was my sister's room." She stopped. Gabriel opened the door slowly. Inside, everything had been arranged with such love that it seemed as if someone had spent days preparing every detail. The crib was against the wall. The clothes were folded. There was an embroidered blanket, a small vase with fresh flowers on the table, and on the dresser, an old photo of Elena smiling and hugging a younger Gabriel. Young, Emilia stood in the doorway, unable to take a step. Her eyes filled with tears, and her body began to shake. "I can't," she said, almost in a whisper. "I don't have that right. Forgive me for opening that wound." And on top of that, using her room, Gabriel approached her and touched her gently on the shoulder, his eyes also filled with tears. "Emilia, this is the greatest happiness of my life. Elena would be truly happy. She was always like that, taking care of everyone, and now this room will finally have life again, just as she would have wanted." She cried a quiet, deep cry, the kind you keep inside for years. She entered slowly, looked around calmly, went to the crib, and placed Milagros inside carefully, as if asking for permission. Then she turned, looked at Gabriel, and could only say, "Thank you for everything." He nodded and replied, "Welcome home." The days began to have a different rhythm, simple, slow, human. The baby's crying was now the alarm clock of the house. Gabriel already knew if it was early morning, it was time for a bottle. If it was in the afternoon, it was time for a diaper change. He, who had never changed a baby in his life, now did everything with care, and when he made a mistake, he laughed. Emilia also laughed, even though she was still recovering with slow steps and weak arms. "You're becoming an expert doctor," she joked. "I promise I'll ask for raises if Milagros he would hire me," he replied, with the baby in his arms, his shirt soaked with milk. During the day, he helped her walk one step at a time, calmly holding her hand as if he were holding the world. Sometimes she complained of pain, sometimes she wanted to give up, but he always said, "1 step today, 2 tomorrow, 3 when you're ready, and I'll be here for all of them." Little by little, Emilia regained her color and began to laughing. She slept better, and without realizing it, the 3 of them formed a routine of their own, a life of their own, a life for 3. At night, the silence in the house was different. It was a full silence. The baby slept in her crib. The 2 of them sat in the living room with a cup of tea and talked little. But when they looked at each other, there was something there, something that was slowly being born, without a name, without pressure, but with truth. One early morning, after another difficult day, Gabriel was preparing the milk when he heard a soft sound coming from the bedroom. It was Amelia crying. He entered slowly and found her sitting on the edge of the bed with her arms crossed and her face hidden. "What happened?" he asked, kneeling in front of her. She took a while to answer, but when she spoke, it was as if she were vomiting years of pain. "I'm dirty, Gabriel, marked by that man, by everything that happened. I don't deserve this peace or this affection. Or you." Tears fell heavily. She was trembling, and for the first time she seemed afraid. Not of the past, but of the present. Afraid of ruining what they were doing. Gabriel held her face gently with both hands, as if afraid of breaking her. "Listen to what I'm going to say now, because I'm never going to repeat it again." He paused and took a deep breath. "You are not what he did to you. You are not the pain. You are not the trauma. You are a mother. You are love. You are life. And you are beautiful inside and out. And since your daughter was born, your old life died. You are Amelia, a mother who has a daughter to care for and a life to live." She tried to look away, but he wouldn't let her. "You think the pain erased who you are, but it only made you stronger. You went through hell and came back with a baby girl in your arms." She cried more, but this time it was different. It was the cry of someone who hears something they've been waiting to hear their whole life. Hear her whole life. He wiped her tears with his fingers, then pressed his forehead against hers and whispered, "Don't be afraid to be happy, Amelia. You are no longer alone." And there, in that small room with the sleeping baby beside her, something changed. It wasn't just care. It wasn't just gratitude. It was love, beginning to blossom in the most beautiful way, with truth and healing. It was just another afternoon, one of those that begin quietly with the smell of coffee in the air and the sound of the fan spinning slowly on the living room ceiling. Amelia was sitting on the couch with Milagros asleep in her arms, lulled by the warmth of her mother's lap. Gabriel was in the kitchen preparing something simple for dinner. It was a normal day, a beautiful day, until the cell phone rang. He answered distractedly, not noticing the unknown number, and in seconds, his face changed. On the other end of the line, a man with a cold, direct tone, informing him that Amelia's cousin had been granted provisional release. The court had released him from the trafficking charges. He would still be investigated, and would still have to answer for his crimes, but he would be free. Gabriel hung up the phone slowly, and remained still for a moment. He didn't even know the guy's name. He didn't know he was so problematic and dangerous. Then he took a deep breath and walked into the living room. Amelia noticed him immediately. "What's wrong?" she asked, settling Milagros in her arms, her voice already trembling. He sat down next to her and looked down, as if he hated having to say what he was about to say. "Amelia, they called. I don't know how they got the number, but they said your cousin was accused of drug trafficking. They arrested him and released him." She froze, completely motionless for a few seconds, then began to tremble. Her face lost color, her chest rose and fell rapidly, and her eyes, which had learned to smile so much, were now filled with panic. No, he's going to find me." Her breathing quickened, and her arms squeezed Milagros so tightly that the baby moved in fear. Gabriel held her shoulders firmly but gently. "Look at me," he said in a firm voice. "Look me straight in the eyes." She looked up, crying. "As long as I live, they will never touch you again." The words came out like a promise, an oath. "I know what that man did to you. I know what he stole from you, but he's not in charge anymore. You're safe now, and you're not alone." She cried as if saying goodbye to her fear, but it still hurt. It still lived inside her. It still left its mark. "What if he comes?" she asked, almost in a whisper. Gabriel answered without hesitation. "He'll find me standing in front of him, and he'll understand clearly that you have someone now, that you have a family now." He pulled her toward him and hugged her tightly, Milagros between them, protected in the midst of that love that was born of pain, but grew with courage. And there, even with the fear of return, she understood for the first time in her life that she no longer had to flee. The nights now had a different rhythm. They were no longer marked only by Milagros' cries, or by the deep silence that Gabriel knew so well. They were lively human nights, full of small gestures. Emilia, still recovering, took care of her daughter with the eyes of someone who doesn't want to miss a second. And Gabriel watched everything closely, helping where he could, and also where he couldn't. Sometimes she would fall asleep on the couch with the baby in her arms, exhausted, and he would cover her with a blanket, slowly, without making a sound. Other times, he would rock the baby while Emilia rested, and he would stay and watch her sleep with that calm, that peace, that only those who have already been through a storm. It was on those quiet nights, between bottles and sighs, that Gabriel began to realize it was more than gratitude, more than care, more than the desire to protect. It was love, but he didn't say it. He kept it to himself, like someone who is afraid of ruining something so beautiful with words. So he just took care of her, cooked, woke up first, changed diapers, went to get medicine, listened to her insecurities. He was there, and she felt it. She knew that there was something there, something that didn't need to be said, but it was on one of those nights, when exhaustion sets in, that everything changed. Milagros was already asleep. The house was silent, with only the kitchen light on. Emilia was sitting on the couch with her feet tucked under her, wearing baggy pants, her hair loose, her gaze lost. Gabriel appeared with 2 cups of tea, sat down next to her, and they stayed there in silence. Suddenly, she turned her face slightly and looked at him with eyes filled not with tears, but with something deeper. She took his hand gently, a slow, firm, warm touch. "I don't know when it started," she said in a low voice, "but you are already more than everything to me." Gabriel was slow to react. He looked at her as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing, as if he had waited so long for that moment, that now he didn't know what to do with it. He said nothing, only his hand back firmly, truthfully, and in that silence filled with feeling, she knew. He loved her too, even if he didn't say it. It was love, simple and real, without big promises or haste, just love that heals, that stays. The process began days after the last visit from the DIF. It was necessary. Gabriel knew that if they didn't act quickly, they could take Milagros and Emilia away from him with a simple formality, a stamp, a signature from someone who didn't know the story, who hadn't lived through those months, who didn't know what the 2 of them had faced. And so he took up the fight personally, not as a doctor, but as a man, as someone who knows that there are things that cannot be left in the hands of those who only see paperwork. He hired a lawyer and gathered medical reports, studies, photos, and reports that showed Emilia's recovery, her bond with her daughter, and the baby's progress. But more than that, he prepared his testimony. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was full, people rushing in and out with folders in their hands, serious faces. Emilia was nervous, holding Milagros in her arms, her heart beating wildly. Gabriel was by her side the whole time, breathing deeply, speaking softly. "Everything will be fine. Just speak from the heart." And that's what she did. She sat down in front of the judge, and she told everything without embellishment, without rehearsing. She spoke of the past, of the fear, of the escape, of the trauma. He spoke of the pregnancy in the early hours of the morning at the bus station, of the hospital, of the coma, and of Gabriel, when he couldn't even open his eyes. He spoke to me every day, and that's why I came back. I came back for my daughter, and I also came back for myself. Then, it was his turn. Gabriel stood up with the firm posture of a doctor, but with the emotion of a brother, a father, a man marked by everything he had been through. This woman is not just a victim, she is a survivor. And more than that, she is a mother. She never abandoned this child. She fought for her, even unconscious. And all she needs now is the opportunity to continue fighting, standing tall. The judge listened attentively, his eyes filled with tears. There was silence for a few seconds, a heavy silence. And then, with a broken voice, the judge spoke. "Emilia Navarro now officially has custody of her daughter, Milagros." Emilia put her hand to her mouth and cried loudly, her whole body shaking. Milagros slept in her arms, unaware that at that moment, her mother had conquered the world. As she left the courthouse, in the middle of the crowded hallway, Emilia stopped, let go of everything, and hugged Gabriel, A tight, long hug, one of those that needs no words. "You believed in me when I couldn't even open my eyes." Gabriel closed his eyes, hugged her tightly, and replied with a broken voice, "Because you also gave me back my life." And the two of them cried there together in the middle of a world that had tried for so long to take away everything that was now totally theirs alone. It was late afternoon. Golden light streamed through the cracks in the window and painted the house with that warm tone that only the end of the day has. Gabriel was returning from a tiring shift, one of those that leave you exhausted inside and out. He opened the door with his key as usual, hung his coat in the entryway, and before doing anything else, he stopped, not because he had forgotten something, but because of the sound coming from the bedroom, a soft voice, a simple melody without exact lyrics, but full of feeling. It was Amelia singing softly. He walked slowly down the hall, quietly, as if he didn't want to break the spell. When he reached the door, he didn't go in. He just stood there, watching. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, with Milagros lying on her lap, wrapped in a little blanket with animal pictures on it. The baby's eyes were closed, and yet she seemed to be smiling. Amelia was stroking her daughter's hair, humming in that motherly way she had learned entirely by following her instincts. That scene, that house, that moment. Gabriel felt a lump in his throat. He didn't cry, not yet, but his chest filled with a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if the air there was lighter, as if every corner of the house had been cleaned inside, as if time had stopped for a second just to let him feel that now that house smelled of life, the smell of people, the smell of peace. He leaned against the wall and stood there in silence, just watching with a smile that slowly spread across his face, a real smile, one that wasn't fake or rehearsed, a smile he hadn't given in years. And in that moment, he understood. It was no longer just his house. It was a home. It belonged to them, to the three of them. The night was quiet. The baby was already sleeping peacefully in her room after another early morning full of colic and affection. Amelia was on the terrace with a blanket over her shoulders, looking at the sky. The moonlight illuminated just enough to show the contours of her face, and although she had dark circles under her eyes and looked tired, there was peace on her face. Gabriel arrived slowly with 2 cups of tea in his hand. He sat down next to her, gave her the cup, and remained silent. It was a beautiful silence, one that did not weigh heavily with trust. She took a sip of tea, took a deep breath, and then began to play with the cup's handle with her fingers nervously. Her chest rose and fell faster. Gabriel noticed and asked her with his eyes. She looked at him without smiling, but with the truth coming out of her face. "I don't just want your protection," she said in a low voice, almost a whisper. "I want your heart." Time stood still. Gabriel looked at her for a few seconds, as if he were reliving everything. The first time he saw her face, the moment he held Milagros for the first time, every cry, every hope, every silence. And then he cried. Not much, not loudly, but truly, with those tears that come when you no longer need to hide. She was yours from the first day. She smiled a small, emotional smile, like someone who had always needed to hear that. The days that followed were peaceful, full of glances and soft touches of complicity, until one sunny weekend, the two of them entered a small chapel in the neighborhood. Just the priest, a couple of friends, miracles in their arms, with a little white dress and a flower in her hair. Amelia wore a simple, pretty dress, her hair down, almost natural, her eyes shining. Gabriel's tie was crooked, and his hands were sweaty, but his smile was that of someone who had found everything. The priest spoke little, going straight to the heart, and when he asked if they wanted to walk together from then on, there was no doubt, only truth. Gabriel couldn't hold back the tears, nor did he try. As they left the church, amid kisses on the forehead, warm hugs, and the smell of baby in the air, Amelia grabbed his arm tightly, and in that instant, a paper was signed. A new name was written. Now she was Emilia Navarro Valverde, and Milagros, with her calm little face, officially became Milagros Navarro Valverde. An entire family was reborn. It was a quiet Saturday morning, one of those quiet, unhurried ones. Emilia had gone out with Milagros to visit a neighbor, and the house was silent. Gabriel took the opportunity to check one of the old shelves in the living room, something he had been putting off for a long time. He took out dusty books, old papers, folders from when he was still doing his residency, and in the middle of it all, a small light wooden box. He stared at it for a while. He knew what it was. He opened it slowly, smelling the scent of wood mixed with the passage of time. Inside were letters, photos, drawings, memories of his sister, Elena. He took one of the letters, carefully folded, with her name written on the front in round, loving letters. For you, Gabby. He sat down on the couch with the letter in his hands, took a deep breath, and read her handwriting dancing on the paper, full of life as it always was. And there, in the middle of the text, a phrase stopped him in his tracks. If one day you find someone without strength, lend them yours. It is God trusting you to do what only love can achieve. Gabriel couldn't hold on to the paper. His hand began to shake. His eyes quickly filled with tears, and he cried silently, crying like someone who misses someone, but also like someone who finally understands the reason for so many things. Every pain, every loss, every encounter. That phrase seemed to have been written for that moment, for Emilia, for miracles, for himself, because that was what he did, lending his strength when she couldn't fight. He fought when she couldn't speak. He was her voice when she couldn't love. He waited, and now they were a family. He folded the letter carefully, placed it on his forehead, and closed his eyes. He remained like that for a few minutes in silence, giving thanks because, in some way, Elena had never left. She had only left an empty space that was now, for the first time, full again, full of life, love, meaning, and all that, because he had believed that love could still heal. The morning was clear. The sun came in through the living room window and drew a little path of light on the floor that reached the foot of the crib. Milagros slept there peacefully with her arms open, and that way of sleeping that those who trust the world have. Emilia was sitting on the rug playing with a mobile of colorful animals that moved on its own with the wind. Gabriel stood at the door, watching. He didn't say anything, just watching. Time stood still there. It was as if everything he carried in his chest had suddenly found the right place to rest. The pain he thought would be with him for the rest of his life was now there, silent, not gone, but healed. The wound Elena had left with her departure was now different, because there was someone in that world who reminded him to love, to care, to keep breathing. He took a deep breath, and suddenly everything made sense. The early morning in the hospital, the unexpected kick, the fight against death, the sleepless nights, the fear, the love, everything. Gabriel knelt down next to Emilia. He didn't need to say anything, but he spoke softly anyway. I thought I had lost everything, but that was when God gave me back what I had lost. She didn't respond with words. She just took his hand and squeezed it gently. Milagros moved in her crib as if she could sense what was happening. She made a soft little noise. She laughed in her sleep. Gabriel looked at his daughter, then at the woman who had brought life back to that house, and he felt that now the meaning was there, complete, simple, alive, and no one could ever take it away from him again. And if it were you, if someone crossed your path with nothing, no name, no strength, no hope, would you have the courage to stop everything, to stay, and fight for that person, even though you didn't know them, to reach out your hand when everyone else had turned away? Their faces. Gabriel didn't know who Emilia was, but he stayed, he believed, and because of that, one life was saved, then another, and in the end, he too was saved. Now it's your turn. What would you do in this situation? Would you trust Emilia if you were in her shoes? Write your comments and join us by saying, I would believe her too. If you liked the story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. The next story might give you a new perspective. Watch the video appearing on your screen right now. It may give you goosebumps. It has made many people cry and think differently about their lives. Click on it. I guarantee you won't come out the same way you went in.